What is up, guys? Welcome to Thelema Lab. Is that what we're calling this?
Okay, sure, yeah.
Where we combine spirituality and biohacking to basically try to seem like experts. And today what we're going to be talking about is antinomianism. Antinomianism is basically the concept that some Protestant sects in Christianity, but this isn't just related to Christianity, this is across all spiritualities. There's groups that think that morality doesn't really have anything to do with your spiritual development. So for example, if you believe in Jesus, then you're saved. You can do whatever you want, right? And this is a criticism that a lot of Gnostic sects had from the Orthodoxy, where they were having these big orgies and stuff because they thought they're saved anyways. So how much does morality have to do with spirituality? In our modern exoteric world, they think it's everything, right? You have to be a good person in order to have a high level of spirituality. But what we learn is you can develop your spirituality through meditation, through breath work, through developing your psychic abilities and developing your power to influence other people and enact changes in the world. That ultimately is your spiritual power. And you can gain that kind of power with people like Illuminati or Freemasons or whatever. You don't have to be a good person to have a high level of spirituality. I would argue that that's objectively true. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so there's definitely some limitations with this idea of, oh, if I'm good, then I will appease God and I will go to heaven, and if I'm bad, then God will damn me to hell. So the first thing I think about when I think of that philosophy is the story of Jesus. So from the traditionalist Christian perspective. So obviously Jesus wouldn't be Jesus without the story of Jesus. Jesus would not be Jesus without him being crucified, without him dying for everyone's sins, right? But then you have to think about, okay, that means that Jesus would not be Jesus without everyone who was involved in the story being involved in the story. So Pontius Pilate, who was thought of this evil guy from the traditionalist Christian perspective, he crucified Jesus. But that was part of the story. If you view this world from the lens of God's divine cosmic plan, then that was God's plan to implement that story so that Jesus could die for everyone's sins and become this prophet or whatever. So Pontius Pilate, even though he was evil, was an integral part of that, and Jesus wouldn't be Jesus without Pontius Pilate. So it's like to delineate and look at good and bad through this dichotomy is to overlook the interconnectedness of all things. Jesus wouldn't be Jesus without Pontius Pilate. In fact, Pontius Pilate created the archetype of Jesus in some sense because he was responsible for his crucifixion. So could God really view Pontius Pilate as bad or condemn Pontius Pilate if Pontius Pilate was an integral part of the Jesus story, the best story that God has ever created? So it doesn't make any sense. You got to look at it from the perspective of a movie. There must be conflict, there must be good and evil in order to create this magnificent narrative. So that's the limitation of looking at everything as good and bad, is because of course good is dependent on bad, dependent on origination and whatnot. So yeah.
The ultimate example of this might not be Pontius Pilate, but Judas, right? And there's the apocryphal text of the Gospel of Judas that talks about that Judas might have had a conversation with Jesus behind the scenes, where Jesus actually told him that he is his most trusted disciple. So he has to secretly go and do this, because if you really look at the research, the amount of silver, what was it, 30 pieces of silver? It wasn't a lot of money that he received. And the way that the church wants to put it is like, oh, he betrayed Jesus for such a small amount of money. But what a lot of these texts that were dug up in the Nag Hammadi library in the 20th century, and these are ancient texts from the 1st and 2nd century, and what they wrote about is the reason why Judas accepted the money, he would have accepted one piece of silver. It was his and Jesus' plan. It was a publicity stunt. You know what I mean? Yeah. And we've seen this in a lot of different cults and a lot of different messianic movements, where they'll do these kinds of stunts. They'll do these kind of big publicity stunts where two major guys in the movement will pre-orchestrate a conflict to create the dualistic good and evil story in order to rally their followers, because they know that people with low IQ love to be on the moral high ground.
Yeah. This was Osho's theory. It's called like the swoon hypothesis. This is actually one of the theories of Jesus' resurrection that I really resonate with, is because it aligns with one of my favorite conceptualizations of God, and that is God as the ultimate actor, right? He's putting on one grand divine cosmic play.
Well, he would be the puppet master, right?
Well, and the actor and the script and all of it combined into one. So essentially, you know, he tricks himself into ignorance and is method acting humans. Like, we are God method acting humans. And so the best method actor can forget that he's even acting. So the swoon hypothesis is that Jesus, he swooned. He didn't actually die on the cross. It was all an act. And there's a lot of evidence for this. I mean, he was taken to his friend's tomb, for God's sake. So Pontius Pilate didn't check if he died. The only person that checked if he died was the centurion, and the centurion was a believer. So there's ample evidence for that theory. Of course, who knows if that's the case, but it's one interesting story. It's one interesting way to look at that narrative. So
what if it was all an act? Would that make Jesus any less good? Would that make the impact that he made any less good? But that would make him immoral in a sense, because he's lying and he's doing this whole, you know, conspiracy and stunt, you know what I mean? And this is what they say about groups like the Illuminati, which I did research about the Illuminati, and the Illuminati is a real group. It is a real occult group that was founded in France in the 18th century. And it's unclear whether they're still functioning under the name Illuminati or whatever, but these secret societies did exist, and where people discussed these concepts and tried to come up with plans in order to manipulate the public to act in a certain way. And morality is probably the easiest way to manipulate people. If you look at the right and the left, right? The left right now, we're in the middle of a presidential cycle. The left loves to play this card, but are they really on the moral high ground? And then there's always this debate that the right are arguing that the left are actually worse than them because they're trying to play the moral high ground and they're trying to morally manipulate people in order to get the votes, and that makes them bad. And whereas the right is honest and they're good, but then when they're honest, they say the most effed up stuff and they do the most effed up stuff and say things that appeal to our morality in a bad way. So who's better? Is it better to pretend at least that you're good in order to control people and push out a message of peace and love while in the background doing what you need to do? Or is it better to just, you know, let the brakes off and just do whatever and let it be like a free-for-all anarchy?
yeah, that's the issue. I mean, morality is inherently dualistic, so you're always going to run into contradictions eventually. So I don't think Jesus would be any less of a prophet if the swoon theory is what really happened. I think that makes him brilliant. It makes him a genius. And obviously, I mean, I think most people would agree, if they think about it deeply enough, that deception can be used for benevolent purposes. Most people's parents trick them to believe in Santa Claus, but obviously, you know, you perceive that as advantageous in a way. It was a great story, and it was very entertaining, and it led to a lot of amazing memories. So thinking of deception as inherently bad is very reductive. Deception can be used for good. Now, it's may not be smart to necessarily promote that. You have to think of it with a lot of nuance, because that idea can obviously be corrupted very quickly, and people can deceive for their own selfish reasons. But you also have to think about, how do you even know if any action is good or bad in the first place? Have you heard the story of the Chinese farmer?
No.
So, abridged version, really quick. Father and son, so they lose a horse. Oh, bad. But then the horse comes back with 3 horses. Oh, good. and then the son was riding on the horse. He falls off and breaks his arm. Oh, bad. But then the people come around to draft young men out to war, and because he had a broken arm, he doesn't go out to war. Oh, good. And then, you know, the story could keep on going. It's like, how do you know whether an event is good or bad? Well, it depends on the time frame you look at it. It depends on your perspective. And we're not omniscient as humans, so we don't know the complete causal chain of events that succeeds a specific event. So how could you possibly classify an event as a net good or a net bad? You're not, because you can't look at it on the broadest perspective unless you're a psychic. So it's fairly arrogant to consider any event as good or bad, and the most propitious perspective is probably just to say, well, it's all good. I mean, yeah.
Well, the Chinese are really good at this. You know, they've kind of mastered this in a sense. And this is why my theory is that China is going to be the world leading power in the future, is because they have a very well organized, systematized way of understanding these causal chains and the interaction between good and bad. I mean, if you just look at the yin yang symbol, right? It's like they've understood this already, and this is kind of imprinted within their collective unconscious in a way that it's not in the West. We're still squabbling over good and evil. We're still right and left. We're still doing the Civil War thing, while China are kind of all on the same page. And they just decided, hey, you know, good or bad, whatever, we're just focused on results. We're focused on becoming the world power, and that's why they're careening past, you know, a lot of these Western nations very quickly. But outside of politics, how do we apply this in our personal lives, right? Because we're a microcosm of the macrocosm, right? Not only do we need to enact change in the world outside of us, but we need to enact change in the world inside of us, right? So how do you decide what your own personal morality is and what is right and wrong for you if you're trying to take an, you know, enlightened perspective on it?
Yeah, so the only way that I think we can even possibly act as humans, I think that we are restricted to acting selfishly. I think that we can only act in ways that we think will help our survival and or incite some sort of positive emotion. And at first, that may sound very cynical, but I don't believe it is, because I believe if you act selfishly with wisdom, the duality between selfishness and selflessness collapses, and it actually helps everyone. I think that some people act selfishly, but they're not taking every variable into account, and so they're not truly acting selfishly. They have a blind spot, and then that causes them to suffer.
But why do you say selfish then?
Well,
why don't you say selfless? Because
exactly.
by choosing one, but you say we should act selfishly. That shows your bias towards selfishness, because you're choosing that word. You could say we should only act selflessly, and we don't know.
Yeah, true. I mean, like I said, it's like the duality between selflessness and selfishness collapses. I just suppose if you look at it through the lens of a biological organism and an individual, then you would be acting selfish. But if you look at it through the lens of society or the collective, you would be acting selfless. And so what do you identify with, or what lens are you viewing it through? I mean, most people, they're viewing life through an egoic lens. They're viewing it through the lens of the individual. They don't even know how to identify with the collective, or, I mean, you can try, I suppose it's more difficult. So I think, I don't know, it's just a certain perspective. I think that it's easier to view it through the lens of, okay, I'm a biological organism, I can only act selfishly, but if I act wise, then I also benefit the collective. I mean, if you think of, again, it's just a perspective. You can think everything you do, no matter how selfless it seems, is still selfish. I mean, even if you donate to charity, why are you donating to charity?
I disagree. You know, this is an idea that was pushed by Dawkins in The Selfish Gene, and it has really permeated into the collective unconscious, and we're raised with this idea, and I think this is a symptom of our capitalist world. I think in communal societies, people are actually harshly punished for acting selfishly or thinking selfishly, and they're forced to constantly consider how other people are viewing them. And we see this culture clash when we live in Thailand, right? And we see this culture clash happen a lot, where we are prone to thinking selfishly in different situations. Like, for example, if I go out to a restaurant and they totally mess up my order, which happens every time you eat out in Thailand, they never get your order right, ever, not even once. And if you complain to them and you do the American thing of like, take my food back, it's too spicy, whatever, it's like highly frowned upon. Whereas in the US, they would be like, yeah, sure, you know, whatever, we messed up your order. They would take accountability for it. So the way in the US is like, this individual is upset because us as an organization have done the wrong thing and we're going to try to remedy that. But in Thailand, it's more like, this guy is disturbing the peace for no apparent reason. It's like, okay, whatever, we messed up his order, but why is he making a big deal about it? So they have a totally different lens of viewing it through. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'm not espousing Dawkins' selfish gene theory at all. Dawkins views the world through an atheist materialistic standpoint, and he's fairly cynical. I believe that us acting selfishly, but again, like I said, if you act wise, then the duality between selfishness, selflessness collapses. I think that that's beautiful. The idea is that it's just a certain way of viewing the world, but you can also view it, of course, through the other side of the coin. But even if you donate to charity, why would you donate to charity if it didn't feel good? It is impossible to do something that you don't believe will help you in some way. Even if someone dies like for their children, they're doing so because they have such a strong emotional bond. They think that doing that is more honorable than running away and letting their child die. Like they couldn't even live with themselves. So it's like everyone is like inherently, as biological organisms, we must act in a way that benefits us. But then the beautiful thing is, I think that if we're wise, what truly benefits us on the deepest level benefits everyone. And that's what's beautiful. And reality is set up in that way. And yeah, I look at it in a very optimistic sense.
So how do you use this perspective to approach specific issues? For example, something I think about a lot in the US, right? There's this huge issue about, you know, drag queens in schools and teaching kids to be gay and all this kind of stuff. This is something that's constantly a moralistic debate, and this is like the pinnacle. This and abortion, I would say, are like the two things that are constantly coming up in this presidential cycle as like the moralistic debate. So how do we take this non-dualistic, antinomian approach of thinking like, okay, we're good no matter what, like it doesn't, either way, you know, every light has a shadow, every shadow is caused by a light, but how do we formulate opinions on these issues? That's something that I've really been struggling with. And especially with the Kamala coming in to replace Joe Biden, it's like, I really don't know who's the right. I mean, it seems like it's very difficult to decide which choice is correct.
Yeah, so the hedonistic left, so Jordan Peterson condemns the hedonistic left. He points out its obvious limitations. They are sacrificing their long-term holistic well-being for short-term gratification. And so you might ask, like, why is that wrong? Well, because it's not maximizing long-term net positive emotion. So I think this is where Jordan Peterson might have a blind spot. I mean, maybe if you talk to him about it, he would probably understand, but every philosophy is hedonistic in the sense that it's trying to maximize positive emotion over the course of your entire life. And so the limitation of hedonism is that it doesn't maximize long-term positive emotion over your entire life. You're sacrificing your pleasure later for pleasure now. And so every philosophy is hedonistic in the sense that they're trying to maximize that positive emotion. And so this is where wisdom comes in. We're all trying to maximize positive emotion for ourselves, and then I believe if you're wise, you want to maximize positive emotion for the collective, because that in turn then maximizes positive emotion for you. And so that's the idea, is you combine this search for this positive emotion with wisdom, and then you end up doing the right thing.
Well, hedonism originally was a Greek school of philosophy, like Stoicism, and they had hedonism. And the hedonists, what they wanted to do was sit around eating grapes, reading books, doing things that maximize their pleasure. But they were because they were interested in philosophically about maximizing pleasure, they actually wrote a lot of stuff about how you need to be able to control your dopamine levels and stay sensitive to pleasure, or else you're not going to be able to get the most pleasure out of life. So this is something that they were aware of, and over time, this word hedonist came to mean like maximizing extreme pleasure in the moment right now, because people like our friend Tony Huge, for example, took that and were like, okay, but how do I push that to its limit? Like, how much pleasure could I get out of right now without having to worry about having the rebound later? And it's very difficult to understand where exactly that line is. Like, could I do a ton of drugs today and then feel good tomorrow? No, right? But could I have a threesome today and feel good tomorrow? In some cases, yeah, right? But most people will never have, a threesome, or they'll never have these extreme experiences of elation, and they don't necessarily know. So this goes back to the issue, like, where do people set the line, right, in order to understand how antinomian they should be? Like, how much can we be allowed? And this is what I really want to, explore deeply in this video. It's like, how much should we be allowed to enjoy ourselves while still living a life that we view as fulfilling without necessarily getting that negative pushback to the point where we suffer?
Yeah, so the idea is you should search, and everyone is doing this, by the way, even Jordan Peterson, whether you're aware of it or not, everyone is searching to maximize positive emotion. So even Jordan Peterson, he espouses this quest for meaning. But what even is meaning on the fundamental level? What meaning provides you is some sort of underlying positive emotion that consoles you even in your deepest moments of suffering. And that's why he's such a fan of this meaning thing, is because it gives him positive emotion even in his worst moments. And so you should be searching, and you should be researching and learning and contemplating how to maximize pleasure long term. And it gets extremely complex, as you're intimating. It's like you gotta understand your dopaminergic reward system. You can't take things too fast. You can't just do a bunch of cocaine now, a lot of pleasure now, but then the next day you feel terrible. Is it worth it? No. And so, of course, you want to have meaning and purpose that gives you that long-term sense of meaning, that underlying positive emotion, and you want to benefit society because that gives you positive emotion. And so you want to maximize long-term positive emotion. You just have to figure out how you do that, and that's not an easy chore.
So how have you figured it out? I mean, I think maybe for people watching, we can lay out exactly the things that we do to do this kind of stuff, and then they can choose to take or not take things from it, as they see fit.
Yeah, well, I had an idea of the perfect lifestyle that I thought would bring me happiness, girls, money, fame, and I actually achieved that, and I was no happier, right? And so that made me think, okay, this happiness thing is much more complicated. And then I realized I need to search deeper. I need to deconstruct the mind. I need to take advice from the Eastern practitioners who meditate. And I realized that happiness doesn't necessarily come from your position or your circumstance in the external world, but more about your mind and how you perceive it, although that's another duality. Of course, it's a relationship between both. You should also seek to optimize your life in the external world and your circumstance. But I understood the power of reshaping, reconstructing the mind, and of course, I realized biohacking is part of that too. And I really just try and throw every technique and protocol at the happiness issue as I possibly can.
The happiness issue.
Yeah.
It's like the meaning crisis, the
Exactly.
happiness issue.
Yeah, kind of one and the same, or they're certainly interrelated. And so, yeah, that's why I take advice from the East, I take advice from the West, I take advice from all these different philosophies, and I try and put it together into one grand protocol.
Right. I think if you look at it like the meaning crisis and the happiness issue, the way I see it in my mind when I think about it just now is like, it's like a Venn diagram. It's like you have happiness and you have meaning, and there's things that you can do that are meaningful but might not necessarily make you happy, and there's things that you could do to make you happy that are not necessarily meaningful, and you should do both of those type of things, right? You can't have meaning in your life if all you do is try to be happy. And this is a mistake that I see like a lot of people making. Like, yeah, you do have to do things that challenge you, and you have to realize like a lot of these spiritual philosophies, like in Kabbalah, they have this idea of the Messiah who goes into hell in order to redeem the fallen sparks and bring them back to the surface so that we can purify the world, right? And a lot of the times, like, they have this idea, like in Christian mysticism, they have this idea of the dark night of the soul. And you have to kind of understand that, like, on the other side, like, you know, like we're saying, on the other side of happiness is this kind of suffering. And, you know, sometimes a lot of geniuses, like, exhibit behavior that people might consider bipolar or cyclothemic or whatever. And I've definitely gone through these phases, because when you do things that are extremely giving you elation, and I'm not talking about doing drugs or psychedelics or anything, just literally, like, you're writing a book, or you're playing guitar, you're doing something creative that is causing you to be so elated. On the other side of that, there is kind of going to be those moments where you're sitting there and you're like, man, what's the point of all of this? Or you try to do the thing that gets you so excited, like you're really into golf. Like, I'm sure there's been moments where you go to try to golf and you're just like, man, I'm not getting it today. Maybe I should give up on this whole thing. And that's just a natural part of it. And I think to be able to see the beauty in that is the difference between the meaning crisis and the happiness equation, or however you put it, right?
Yeah, that's the intelligence behind the entire idea of the dark night of the soul. So it contextualizes those low points in life, and it imbues those low points with this meaning that consoles you in that suffering during that time. And so, yeah, there's this idea of the dark night of the soul. You have these negative points in life, and you go, oh, it's just the dark night of the soul. That gives you some meaning, and you feel better. There's that underlying sense of positive emotion. So, yeah.
But there's also the idea of, like, diving deep into that dark night of the soul. And when you do, being able to be like, revel in that suffering, you know, and fully embrace those emotions. And I think that in the East, they really understand this. In Kabbalah, they really understand this. But in a lot of exoteric Western things, whether it's on the right or the left, or, you know, Christianity or whatever, I feel like they don't understand this, and they don't really teach this to people. Because, like, for example, the Hawkins scale of consciousness, and it's very like, it's not dualistic, because there's a bunch, but it's like very one-sided. It's like, okay, anger is bad, guilt is bad, sadness is bad, joy is good, love is good. And when you put these judgments on these emotions, you're not able to fully feel like, you know, feel the fear. If you're scared, really, to be in the fear, to be in the sadness, to be in the pain, and to see the beauty of that in terms of your experience in life. And a lot of the times, like with Christianity, it does a horrible job at this, because it's like, if you do something that's sexually perverse or disgusting, you know what I mean? To be able to, like, revel in that and to enjoy that is enlightened in a sense, I think, versus to be disgusted with yourself and to feel guilty. Like in Kabbalah, they have an idea of kavaina, and they say that if you can do the most egregious sin, but if you do it while you love God, which is essentially just your higher self, then you're more enlightened than the person who does the best deed externally, but internally knows that they're doing it for themselves or for their own selfishness or whatever. So I think that's kind of that it's when it goes from 2D to like 4-dimensional. It's like you want to be able to do the good thing while feeling bad, do the good thing while feeling good, do the bad thing while feeling good, and do the bad thing while feeling bad.
Yeah.
And then you're really like fully enlightened in the sense that you're just flowing with the universe. You're every single possible thing that could happen to you, you're just embodying it and you're just living it. And that is ultimately what I see as God. He's doing all that stuff all at once on all different layers of the spectrum all at once.
Yeah, and it gets difficult and paradoxical, because it's like, how do you embrace that guilt, fear, shame, disgust? Because the act of doing that, why would you even do that? Because you think that it's going to induce some sort of positive emotion in the long run, right? Like, or else you wouldn't be doing it. And so it gets super paradoxical. It's like you have to trick your mind and really embrace it without the hope for some sort of underlying positive emotion. But then paradoxically, then
you have to be unattached to the positive outcome.
And then,
in order to embody it.
And then paradoxically, the positivity will arise, but you can't yearn for the positivity or else it defeats the purpose. So, yeah, it's difficult. It's paradoxical. It's a mind fuck.
Like, you know, Connor's a prophet. He's the newest prophet. And in Connor's quest to become a prophet, I researched prophets, because you got me thinking about the idea and thinking, like, what is a prophet? How do you even be one, right? Because, you know, it's like, if you want to be the best golfer in the world, you need to study the best golfers. If you want to be a prophet, you got to study the prophets. And I was especially fascinated by the prophet Isaiah, right? And he saw, it was either Isaiah or Ezekiel, I think it was Isaiah, the guy who saw the chariot, the vision of the chariot. And he connected essentially with God, right? And God was telling him to do all this stuff to break down his ego. And I sent you a video before of the Sufi Muslim mystics, the Kolandariya. And these guys also did a lot of things to break down their ego. And then in Hindu or Vedic, they have the left-hand path. Have you heard of this?
No.
So these left-hand path guys, this is a good, you know those clips, like, have you heard of the left-hand path Hindu guys?
Oh, yeah.
So what these guys do is they literally are insane. They will drink water out of people's skulls, and they'll live in a graveyard, and when one of them dies, they'll like cremate them and eat the dust. And they say that this is the fastest way to reach enlightenment, because they're trying to become completely unattached with the good. And they say that if you want to go on this spiritual path, it's not the easiest path, it's actually the hardest path to reach enlightenment, but it's the fastest path, because you completely give up your ego, you completely give up what society thinks about you, you're homeless, you take vows of poverty, you take vows of, you know, you're just like a disgusting rat, you know what I mean? And by fully embodying this day after day after day, and you have no attachment to anything other than that, like, think about how attached in reality people are to money, success with girls, all this different stuff. It's like almost every single conversation that you have with people in the normal world, it's like, how's money going? How's girls going? How's six-pack going? It's just like, these guys just got so sick of it that they're just like, F this can't possibly, because how many people have tried the six-pack Bugatti thing, and either you don't achieve it and you're upset and you feel bad about yourself, or you do achieve it and you're upset and you feel bad about yourself. So I'm just gonna eat dust and drink wine out of human skulls. And they say that this is the fastest path to reach enlightenment, because they just completely stop giving a shit. And when I was doing research about these guys, I saw a hint of you in them, you know, because you do this kind of stuff where you want to publicly embarrass yourself and publicly make people think you're insane, and that you're some kind of guy who drinks out of human skulls and eats dust and lives as a homeless guy. Why?
Yeah, so mitigating the fear of the judgment of others, and then also reducing disgust sensitivity. I think that those are two fundamental principles in my spiritual philosophy that are super advantageous. I think that everyone can imagine how dissolving the fear of the judgment of others can help you. Discuss sensitivity, that might be a little esoteric, but the tantric people really understood that. They would drink menstrual blood, they would drink semen, they would do all these disgusting things because they realized that disgust is no longer really an advantageous emotion, and actually it's very detrimental to society. If you tend to be more disgusted at anything, if your disgust sensitivity is high, you actually have a higher inclination to be disgusted toward people, and hate. Disgust toward people, hate arises from that. And so disgust was beneficial, in primal times from an evolutionary perspective, because it kept us from eating rotten food and whatnot. But now, because knowledge is ubiquitous and we know what's going to kill us and not kill us if we eat it, disgust just really isn't an advantageous emotion in modern society. And so, yeah, the tantric people realize this, and that's why mitigating disgust sensitivity may be positive. Yeah. So
when you drank the divine protein shake, did you feel enlightened?
Did I drink the divine protein shake? Has anyone actually seen me drink the divine protein shake? No one even knows if it's real or not. But I can tell you that, yeah, I mean, it's quite, I can imagine if I did do it, it'd be quite liberating, because there's all of this societal condemnation or societal judgment over this specific act for a lot of different reasons from many different groups. And all of a sudden you do that and you kind of say fuck you to the judgment of all those different groups, and it feels very liberating. So that's the idea.
Here's a interesting question. So for me, I've done a lot of things that, you know, would definitely fall under these categories, but I haven't necessarily advertised it to the public.
Right.
So it's like, what's more important, not caring about the judgment of other people or not caring about the judgment of yourself? And how are they intertwined? And how do we, you know what I mean? It's like, what do you choose to want to show to the public that you do, and what do you personally do as your own quest for, you know, overcoming your own disgust sensitivity?
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, they're obviously interconnected and they may be one and the same. If you fear the judgment of others, I think what you really fear is others judging you and then you feeling bad about yourself. You understand that ultimately that's going to incite some sort of negative, positive emotion because you view yourself in a negative way. I mean, well, in the past you were just afraid of death, you know. If you acted outside of societal norms, you could be ostracized from the tribe, and even if you don't feel bad about yourself, you would be afraid that you're going to die.
Right.
But in modern society, yeah, it's more about just feeling bad about yourself. You're not going to be ostracized to the extent that, you know, you wouldn't have any resources to survive.
Well, let's think of like an Illuminati person where like they're drinking blood or they're doing something like this in order to increase their own power, right? But then they don't want to advertise that they're doing it because it's going to make them look weird in the eyes of people who don't understand it, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's like, where is the balance of what you decide to show and what you decide to do personally?
Well, yeah, I've been contemplating that. I think that the ultimate goal would be, you wouldn't have any, well, it's tough. On the one hand, I think, okay, you wouldn't want to have any secrets because those secrets cause stress and you would have to continuously hide those secrets, and that would induce some sort of stress or fear or negative emotion, unless you could be completely content with that and think of it as some cool game that you're playing and love that game, I suppose. But my goal is to live stream myself 24/7 eventually and just not have any part of me that I am not willing to showcase for the entire world to see. I think that's like my ultimate goal. You know, everyone, they have a public life. You know, this is what this is right now. I'm playing a public persona and I'm acting a certain way for the public, and then a lot of people have their private life, their persona that they only showcase amongst their friends and close people, and then many people have a life even deeper than that, some sort of secret life that they don't share with anyone, or they only share with one or two people, but they mostly, their deepest, darkest secrets. And I mean, maybe if you conceptualize those deepest, darkest secrets is cool, and you like the fact that they're secrets, I suppose. It really depends on your mindset and how you view these things, but I also think that it would be really freeing and cool if you could live a life where it's being live streamed 24/7 and you don't do anything that you wouldn't show to the entire world. It's
interesting, like with people who get like exposed, you know what I mean? And sometimes the thing that gets exposed is like a really big deal. Like, you know, that guy, I don't know if you've seen in the news, like Mr. Beast's friend.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, what was that? We should get a clip for that.
Yeah, that's Ava. So Ava, apparently she, formerly he, was flirting with someone who was underage back in the day, you know? And yeah.
Oh, back in the day, and now it comes out?
Yeah, I think it was a while ago. And I think one of the reasons it probably got so big is because, yeah, Ava is trans, and trans people are generally not, they generally try to act very moral. They try to act very woke and say, look, like, I'm this moral person, I'm trans positive, let's go in this direction where we're all, you know, treating people better and being less judgmental, and then all of a sudden this person is doing an act that would be considered very socially unacceptable. And possibly abusive toward this person. I think that
It's tough. It's tough because, you know, you do want to have sympathy for people in terms of them being trans, because it is difficult and it doesn't have anything to do with talking to underage people. I mean, there's plenty of trans people who don't. There's plenty of people who are not trans who do. So it's like being trans and that thing and that have there's no causal relationship between those two things. But then when it happens, people act like there is, and they get dogpiled.
The idea is, it's people really criticize people when they're exposed for something that contradicts their public persona, right? So there's this good example my friend gave me. You know, Tiger Woods, when he cheated on his wife, or it came out that he cheated on his wife with many prostitutes, it was this huge deal. And everyone just absolutely chastised him because he had this public persona. He was this good family man. In fact, all his sponsors, they wanted him to put up this facade of he's this great family man. In fact, there's theories about how he was actually like coerced into marrying his wife just so he could be this family guy for the sponsors. Anyway, then you have Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen just always owned his like drug addictions, his, you know, prostitution predilections. And so when some story came out about, oh, there's Charlie Sheen on drugs, or oh, there's Charlie Sheen fucking a prostitute, it's like no one gave a fuck. They're like, oh yeah, that's his character.
Right.
So it totally depends on your character. And the idea is that like Ava's character, her public persona, totally goes against like the, you know, texting an underage person and flirting with them.
Well, I think everyone's public persona goes against
you would think that, but okay, think about Zerka. Zerka pretends to be a pedophile, and people love him for it. You know?
I guess, but then I guess Zerka, but then you're talking about somebody on the total other spectrum who's like already like like a banned guy and a censored guy. So it's like he kind of pre-framed it, but and it was still bad. Yeah. So you could literally say on video that, you know, I'm not going to say it, but I don't want to get clipped, but like you could say those things about yourself, and then later you can do it, and then you still get in trouble. So it's like ultimately but I understand. I think a good example is Andrew Huberman. He doesn't really talk about himself personally at all. He doesn't try to make himself look like the perfect family man or look like anything. He just stays focused on the science. So then when he gets exposed that he's like a womanizer and all that, it's just like nobody cares, because people are following him for the science, not because he was a certain type of person. So I think it's a good example of like why for me, like moralizing just doesn't make sense, because when you put yourself out there and you try to align yourself with a moral type of message, you're just inviting people to prove how immoral you are, and you're playing into this dualistic thing. If you don't say like Zerka's like, I'm the bad guy, Tiger Woods is like, I'm the good guy, I would rather just be like, hey, you know, anything you see out of me is just like, it is what it is. You make your own judgment. I'm not here telling you for right from wrong, you know?
Yeah.
And I think like celebrities need to do that less if they want to, you know, not get the fallback.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Okay, so do whatever you want.
Isn't that Alistair what Crowley's quote?
Alistair Crowley.
Alistair Crowley's quote. Yeah, what is it? Do what you wish or something?
Yeah, so I recently self-converted myself and changed my name into the religion, Alistair Crowley's religion, and the quote is, "Do as thou wilt is the whole of the law," right? So, but it doesn't mean do whatever you want, like in terms of to hurt other people. And the second part of the quote is something about love under will. I'm a bad Thelemite, so I'll memorize it.
But yeah, I heard the witch girl talking about that. It's basically do as you want, as long as it aligns with like your higher purpose or God or something like that. And so
right, exactly.
That's a big disclaimer, yeah.
And being able to align yourself with that true will is difficult, because you need to really meditate, and you really need to try to connect with your higher self, and you need to constantly be evaluating, is this my higher self, or is this my ego? Is this my superconscious, or simply my consciousness that wants to do this thing? And if it really is your highest self, then do whatever you want, literally, and if it's not, then you need to not do it. And I think that really is true enlightenment, to be able to be like for example, if somebody is gay, to be like, okay, I'm gay, you know what I mean? Clip this one. I'm gay, I'm gonna go fuck a bunch of guys, I'm gonna get my dick sucked, and I'm gonna enjoy it. You know what I mean? And that's fine. If you're gay, be gay, and don't let anybody stop you. But if you want to, for example, I don't know, like manipulate somebody or text a minor or something, like if you're a pedophile and you really have these feelings and stuff like that, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe it isn't your highest purpose to do that, because the collective good is more important than, your own desires or whatever. Maybe your highest purpose isn't to act on these things, not because you don't want to, but because it's going to lead to consequences which stop you from being able to make the positive changes that you want to be able to make. Like Mr. Beast's friend, right? He, she, whatever, can't do the things that they want to do now because of what they did.
Right.
So it's like, so now their true will might not be able to be as enacted as good because of the consequences of their actions. So is it really your true will that wants to do it, or is it just your, desire to please yourself right now? So yeah, I think that's a good overarching thing on antinomianism, and kind of the ultimate thing that I believe in, which is why I self-converted myself, is because, yeah, ultimately, if it aligns with your true will, you will be saved. If you believe in Jesus and you say that he's Lord, you will be saved. And what Jesus is just Christ consciousness. It's something that you can connect with. And once you're connected with that, by all means, but the argument is that when you are connected with that, you're not going to want to do anything that necessarily isn't serving both your selfish desires and your selfless desires at the same time.
Right. That makes sense. Cool.
All right. Thank you guys for watching. Peace.